Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 265. The Fourth Office 1. Oh ho! Surprise flickered in Mok Jae-un's eyes. It was due to the phenomenon occurring with Ma Are-Hyun, the half-breed Westerner and thousand-men commander of the embroidered uniform guard. The energy flowing from his entire body was none other than demonic energy. This was a phenomenon that even Mok Jae-un hadn't anticipated. Is he assimilating with the demonic energy? A very rare occurrence was taking place. No, in the first place he had never directly infused demonic energy into someone like true energy. Demonic energy was formed by gathering all the yin energies derived from death energy, which could be called the energy of death. Therefore he thought it would be a poison to ordinary people. For example, he expected it to devour true energy like death energy. However, surpassing that expectation, Ma Are-Hyun was accepting his demonic energy and internalizing it as his own. There's no rejection. He thought the existing nourishing energy would push it out. But Ma Are-Hyun's true energy was becoming one with the demonic energy, transforming into a new form of demonic energy. Although its purity was lower than Mok Jae-un's, it was undoubtedly demonic energy. This has become interesting. He had simply intended to send his demonic energy to the rampaging parasitic goo poison that had lost its original command goo and had its spell and energy-based commands severed, in order to imprint it. He thought demonic energy was difficult for anyone to interfere with since death energy transcended the realm of consciousness in the first place. But it had produced a completely different result. Was this a coincidence? Or was it a phenomenon only possible for the half-breed Ma Are-Hyun, not a pure Central Plains person? He couldn't tell. Of course he could check with someone else later. After infusing more demonic energy into Ma Are-Hyun's Baihui acupoint and abdomen, Mok Jae-un stopped. The rampaging goo poison in his abdomen had also been imprinted with demonic energy and accepted him as its new command goo, its new master, and the poison energy in his body had subsided. At that moment Ma Are-Hyun, who had regained his senses, spoke. What the hell is this? He seemed to have a strange expression, unable to adapt to his changed energy. That was understandable since the nature of his true energy itself had changed. Moreover, it had taken on an extremely brutal and dark energy. Perhaps that's why he felt it. Ma Are-Hyun looked at Mok Jae-un with trembling eyes. Upon experiencing the vast and highly pure demonic energy emanating from Mok Jae-un, he felt a thrill and a sense of awe. What? Ma Are-Hyun was confused. He couldn't tell if this was truly his own will. His mind was denying it, but his instincts felt a strong sense of reverence towards Mok Jae-un. It was similar to how ants instinctively develop loyalty to serve the queen ant. What have you done to me? Who knows? I only tried to deal with the goo poison, but you took the liberty of internalizing my demonic energy. Demonic energy? My energy is quite different from ordinary people. Now that you've internalized it, you should be able to feel it. That it's destructive and brutal. Tremble. Ma Are-Hyun looked at his own hands. It was an incomprehensible phenomenon. After his energy became one with what Mok Jae-un called demonic energy, his energy had become stronger and increased. No, it seemed to have doubled in strength. He felt like he could win against anyone right now. It was truly a belligerent energy. How did I get this kind of energy? Since you internalized it, I'd be disappointed if you blamed me. Moreover, after I went through the trouble of saving your life. Come to think of it, the rampaging poison energy and the goo poison had stopped moving. Ma Are-Hyun's expression distorted. The reason was, the goo poison is still there. Yes. Of course. I never said I would eliminate the goo poison. I said I would ensure it wouldn't be a problem for your life. At those words, Ma Are-Hyun was at a loss for words. It was undeniable that Mok Jae-un had clearly drawn the line that he wouldn't remove the goo poison until his work was finished. And he had kept that promise. Although he didn't know what this energy was, the goo poison was no longer rampaging. So Ma Are-Hyun asked. The goo poison won't rampage anymore. But what exactly did you talk about with Sang-ik Seo? Given Mok Jae-un's personality, there was no way he had only talked. At his question, Mok Jae-un smiled and replied. Should I say I took over the goo poison? What? At those words, Ma Are-Hyun's eyes widened. What did he mean by taking over the goo poison? What the hell does that mean? It's literal. Just know that I now possess the command goo that Associate Military Commissioner had. At those words, Ma'ari Hyan's expression stiffened again. If he meant it literally, did he really take the female goo poison command goo from Associate Military Commissioner Sangik Seo? That meant the one holding the weakness had changed. But how did he take it? Come to think of it, there was a tremendous master by his side who had subdued him in just a few moves. Even if it was Mok Jayongan, that person's martial arts. What? Ma'ari Hyan swallowed dry saliva for a moment. He hadn't realized it until he could comprehend the demonic energy. But now that he could feel Mok Jayongan's demonic energy, he couldn't fathom how far that energy extended. With this level of energy perhaps. Did you subdue the one guarding Sangik Seo? The guard? You mean that 100-men commander Jayam Chong? Yes. I was going to tell you that he wasn't an ordinary skilled person. He's dead. What? I said he's dead. At those words, Ma'ari Hyan was flabbergasted. That 100-men commander Jayam Chong was an embroidered uniform guard 100-men commander in name, but it was no exaggeration to say that he possessed martial arts skills equivalent to a pacification commissioner. He thought only Gu Songbak, the Southern Pacification Commissioner, and his mentor Soyerin, the 1,000-men commander, could match him, but to hear that such a top master was killed left him speechless. Wait. Then if he had killed the guard Jayam Chong, could it be? Did you kill the Associate Military Commissioner too? How could I? Do you think I would just kill him without reason? At those words, Ma'ari Hyan remained silent. When someone who could go off in any direction said not to worry, he was simply dumbfounded. However, that wasn't the problem now. Then what did you do with him? That person shouldn't have been killed. Although he couldn't touch him until now because of the goo poison in his body, there was conclusive evidence of what he had tried to do, so based on that he could aim for his superiors as well. He's alive and well. Ah. At those words, Ma'ari Hyan felt relieved. If he had simply killed him, it would have only caused a disturbance and alerted his superiors. But as long as he was alive, there was still room for investigation. Ma'ari Hyan got up from his seat. And he tried to take the evidence that was placed on the office desk. To him Mok Jayongan said, I see what you're trying to do with that, but don't do it yet. What? Right now, I don't want any notable incidents to occur within the Imperial Palace. You should know why, right? At those words, Ma'ari Hyan hesitated. He immediately understood what Mok Jayongan meant by those words. He was trying to enter the underground prison of the Imperial Palace to kidnap a prisoner, so he didn't want any incidents to happen internally within the embroidered uniform guard beforehand. However, if he left that person alone, he would definitely report to his superiors and might cut off the tail. If that happened, the evidence and everything else would become meaningless. Wouldn't it be fine as long as it doesn't harm you? I told you not to. As soon as he finished speaking, Ma'ari Hyan put down the human skin mask case. And he unconsciously replied, Understood. After answering like that, Ma'ari Hyan furrowed his brows. What was this phenomenon? That was because he accepted Mok Jayongan's words as if it was natural. As if he was his master. Why? Seeing his baffled reaction, Mok Jayongan raised the corners of his mouth and said, It seems it's not just me. What the hell did you do to me, Who knows? It's just as I told you earlier. But perhaps because you assimilated with my energy, I also feel more familiar with 1,000-men commander Ma'ari Hyan. In this state it seems you'll be able to assist me even better. At Mok Jayongan's words, Ma'ari Hyan felt strange. He should have felt repulsed, thinking that he had done something to him, but instead, whenever Mok Jayongan said something, a paradoxical emotion arose that he should accept it. It felt like he had to do whatever he wanted. He wanted to deny and suppress this incomprehensible change in his emotions with a strong will, but he couldn't. To the confused Ma'ari Hyan, Mok Jayongan said with a smile, I was just thinking that it's about time and I need 1,000-men commander Ma'ari Hyan's help even more. If that task is finished, I'll let you do as you wish. At Mok Jayongan's words, Ma'ari Hyan nodded without hesitation and replied, Understood. I'm glad you're willing. Then please do this for me. Mok Jayongan told him the plan he had in mind. As he listened, Ma'ari Hyan's expression gradually became subtle. That was because his role was quite important in this underground prison heist plan. Trainee Beijing. He was a trainee participating in this Imperial Guard training. Having passed with an average score and been assigned to the Snake Guard, he was finally looking forward to the Embroidered Uniform Guard apprenticeship tomorrow with anticipation. Although his first apprenticeship was in the 4th office that managed the prison, so what? He was determined to do his best and obtain good results. But as he was making his resolution and trying to fall asleep, he was summoned to the Embroidered Uniform Guard 6 Offices Department not long after. They said they had called a reference witness as they were investigating the death of trainee Mok Jae-eun. Why are they calling me as a reference witness? He didn't know much about Mok Jae-eun. No, none of the trainees here knew anything about those from the Heaven and Earth Society. But he didn't understand why they were calling him. He felt puzzled, but since they said it was a simple investigation, he went to the interrogation room of the 6 Offices Department. Knock knock. Bae Ji-suk knocked on the door and said, "This is trainee Bae Ji-suk. I'm here for the reference investigation. Come in." At the voice coming from inside, Bae Ji-suk opened the door. In the dark interrogation room, when he opened the door, he saw a lantern, a table and 2 chairs arranged to face each other. Inside, a masked embroidered uniform guard 1,000-men commander was standing. Bae Ji-suk closed the door, entered and greeted him with his hands clasped. "Did you call for me?" At that question, the masked embroidered uniform guard 1,000-men commander said nothing. When the 1,000-men commander of the 6 Offices Department, which he heard was an investigative department, didn't speak like that, trainee Bae Ji-suk, who became somewhat uneasy, cautiously asked, Is there a problem? Is that why you called me?" At that question, the masked embroidered uniform guard 1,000-men commander opened his mouth. "I'm sorry." "What?" "I didn't call you." "What does that mean?" At that moment, a voice came from right behind him. "I called you." Flinch. There was no presence felt at all, but startled by the voice coming from behind, trainee Bae Ji-suk hurriedly turned around. Huh? Bae Ji-suk's eyes widened as he turned around. That was because Mok Jae-eun, who was said to have been killed in the Embroidered Uniform Guard infirmary a few days ago, was there. You were definitely dead." "Yes. It's nice to see me alive, isn't it?" Why was the guy he knew was dead before he's here? Rather than being happy, he was extremely perplexed. "So, what do you mean you called me?" 1,000-men commander." Bae Ji-suk called out to the masked 1,000-men commander while slowly taking steps back. However, the masked 1,000-men commander remained silent with his arms crossed. Instead, Mok Jae-eun approached closer, raised the corners of his mouth eerily and said, "The 1,000-men commander didn't call you." "What the hell? I heard you're an orphan and have no close friends, right?" "Dabuj, why are you asking that?" Trainee Bae Ji-suk raised his voice, feeling uneasy. Then the corners of Mok Jae-eun's mouth, shadowed by the lantern light, curled up gruesomely. Startled even more by that sight, he tried to take steps back to distance himself, but Mok Jae-eun slowly closed the distance and said, "Nothing much. I was just thinking of borrowing your face for a bit." Chapter 266, The 4th Office, 2. 1,000-men commander Ma Ari-hyun frowned and slightly turned his head. That was because Mok Jae-eun, although he said trainee Bae Ji-suk had fainted, was peeling off the living face skin of the alive Bae Ji-suk. Seeing someone peel off an intact face skin, even if one had a strong stomach, it was naturally difficult to watch. Scrape scrape. As Mok Jae-eun was carving out the facial skin, he nonchalantly said to him, "It seems difficult to watch. What's there to be pleasant about? I guess your stomach is weaker than I thought." It's not just about having a strong stomach, but it's unsettling to peel it off like that when the person is alive and well, not already dead. Of course, Mok Jae-eun had explained the reason. The skin quickly necrotizes upon death. It's much better to do it while it's still elastic and fresh. It was a rather valid reason, but it was still burdensome. Ma Ari-hyun clicked his tongue inwardly and eventually left the interrogation room to avoid the scene. Once outside, he let out a long sigh. Normally, it would be something he could never accept, but he couldn't refuse what Mok Jae-eun wanted. Even when he was doing such a horrific act. He did say that he had selected someone who wouldn't cause problems if touched, but this was truly a cruel act. Trainee Bae Ji-suk. Yes. Is this person someone who won't cause any issues? He's an orphan, and before entering as an Imperial Guard trainee, he was a street thug who threatened and extorted elderly merchants in the marketplace and bullied the weak. He was taken in by a faction of the Grand Preceptor Hang Yun, one of the Four Powers, under the pretense of finding talented individuals, and if it weren't for their recommendation, he would have been weeded out beforehand. So he's not of particularly good character. Among them, yes. Good. Then let's go with this person. In any case, he wasn't someone the Hang Yun was actively promoting, so there wouldn't be any problems, and in the first place he wasn't qualified to join the Embroidered Uniform Guard. However, it was a bit pitiful. Of all people, he had to be caught by such a demon-like guy and meet a miserable end. Early the next morning, after the period of basic training in the Embroidered Uniform Guard, the trainees moved to their respective departments under the guidance of the 1,000-men commanders they were assigned to for their apprenticeship. Among them, the number of team members assigned to the 4th office was a total of 11. The one who received the highest score among them was trainee Zhu Wenxiang, who had placed second in the first test. Someone was closely observing this Zhu Wenxiang from behind. It was none other than trainee Bai Jisuk, or rather Mok Jiangun, wearing his face skin. A glimmer of surprise appeared in Mok Jiangun's eyes. His energy has grown quite a bit. Zhu Wenxiang's innate true energy had increased compared to before. Either he had worked tirelessly after competing with him, or perhaps he had a small opportunity. However, Mok Jiangun's demonic energy had advanced to a level incomparable to when he had fought Zhu Wenxiang or 1,000-men commander So Yaren a few nights ago. Because of that, Zhu Wenxiang's current level of energy didn't bother him much. Mok Jiangun slightly licked his lips. I thought he might notice a little. Like the other trainees, Zhu Wenxiang also failed to notice his presence. Of course, it could be because the gap in their skills had widened even further, but it was somewhat disappointing compared to his expectations. Eventually, they arrived at the main hall of the 4th office in the 6 offices building. The 4th office was the department that managed all the prisons within the Imperial Palace. 1,000-men Commander Mak Myongbo, who was walking ahead, pointed to a building and said, "Here. This is where you will stay for the next 5 days." It was somewhat smaller and shabbier than the dormitory of the Embroidered Uniform Guard's main building, the 6 offices building, where they had been temporarily assigned. They had to stay in such a place for 5 days. Most of the trainees seemed to have similar thoughts, as their expressions were not very pleased. At that moment, someone walked out of the main building of the 4th office with their hands behind their back. The moment they saw the red ceremonial robes, everyone clasped their hands together, lowered their heads and paid their respects. Tap. The person who came out of the main building of the 4th office was none other than Im Gyuwol, the head of the 4th office and the 1,000-men commander in charge. He was a man with torn eyes and a pale face. The overall impression was as if looking at a white snake. At that moment, Im Gyuwol abruptly spoke. "Who here is the one named Zhu Wenxiang?" "That would be me." Zhu Wenxiang politely replied with his head lowered. Then, Im Gyuwol smiled and approached Zhu Wenxiang, saying, "I heard you placed second in the internal energy measurement during the selection process. You can be considered an excellent talent." At his praise, trainee Yong Jiayong, a disciple of the Huashan sect, bit his lip. He was jealous of Zhu Wenxiang receiving attention from the start of the apprenticeship. However, unlike his jealousy, these words did not come from good intentions. Schwip. Im Gyuwol, who had approached right in front of her, placed his hand on Zhu Wenxiang's shoulder. At that moment, Zhu Wenxiang, who had his head lowered, flinched. Mok Jiangun, who was watching this from right behind, narrowed his eyes. It seemed that 1,000-men commander Im Gyuwol wasn't simply grabbing his shoulder but applying pressure with his internal energy. That guess was accurate. The internal energy flowing from Im Gyuwol's hand was entering through Zhu Wenxiang's shoulder and inflicting pain. Squeeze. As he sent his internal energy, Im Gyuwol smiled nonchalantly and said, "I have great expectations for you." At this, Zhu Wenxiang was inwardly flabbergasted. He was an absurd person, saying he had great expectations while trying to suppress him with true energy. He didn't know the reason, but unless he looked down on him, there was no way he would press down on him with such vast internal energy. So he slightly raised his head to glance at his face, and contrary to his smiling face, he was looking at him with a condescending gaze. Why is he doing this? Zhu Wenxiang didn't hide his puzzlement. For some unknown reason, 1,000-men commander Im Gyuwol was clearly acting emotionally towards him. His guess was correct. I heard you're receiving attention from So Yaren? Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul had fallen for So Yaren's beautiful appearance the moment he first saw her, another Thousand Men Commander, and had been yearning for her for a long time. However, she, known as the Ice Flower of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, had always been cold towards him. Whenever he showed interest, she always rejected him bluntly. But why is she, of all people, showing interest in a mere trainee like you? It was something he absolutely could not tolerate. I don't know how great of a talent you are, but I'll make you regret being assigned to me. He couldn't let anyone who received even the slightest attention from her go unscathed. He would make them realize their place. He was going to start by suppressing him with true energy to inflict internal injuries and show him hell during the 5 days he would be here in the 4th office. I'll directly eliminate you within my jurisdiction. In any case, this was his domain. Even if he tormented him and made him drop out, there was no one who would blame or criticize him. Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul raised his internal energy even more. Even if he had placed second in the internal energy measurement, this guy was just a trainee. You'll feel your insides being shaken. But something was strange. By now, Zhu Wenxiang should have collapsed or at least screamed, unable to endure the true energy pressing on his insides. However, there was no reaction at all. Crack. At that moment, cracks appeared on the floor where Zhu Wenxiang was standing. Seeing this, one of Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul's eyebrows raised. This was a phenomenon that was only possible if he sent the true energy he had injected through his Yanshan acupoint. Look at this guy. He was a young man who hadn't even reached adulthood yet. Such a guy had deflected his energy? Yes. That's right. Whoosh. At that moment, Im Gyul's cultivation level rose. Flinch. Thousand Men Commander. Thousand Men Commander Mak Myongbo, who noticed this, called out to Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul. He had been quietly observing what he was doing while continuously holding Zhu Wenxiang's shoulder, but he didn't expect him to be applying such internal energy pressure on a trainee. However, Im Gyul had no intention of ending it here. Try enduring this too. Im Gyul raised his cultivation level even more. Then Zhu Wenxiang's body gradually began to tremble as well. TSK. He tried to protect his shoulder with his own innate true energy and deflect the incoming internal energy, but as the cultivation level increased further, it became increasingly difficult. Crack crack. The cracks on the floor had somehow spread to the other trainees nearby. Startled, they stepped back. Before they knew it, everyone's attention was focused on them. What the hell is he doing? Why is the Thousand Men Commander doing this? Anyone could see that Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul was pressuring Zhu Wenxiang with his internal energy. Seeing Zhu Wenxiang's complexion gradually worsening, it might turn into a problem. At that moment, Thousand Men Commander Mak Myongho approached to dissuade him. Thousand Men Commander. That's enough. Don't interfere. Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul rebuked him in a low voice and waved his hand. It meant not to intervene. At this, Thousand Men Commander Mak Myongho couldn't hide his difficulty. Having served Im Gyul for a long time, he knew his personality better than anyone else. If he tried to stop him here, his anger might turn towards him. Crack crack. Ugh. For the first time, a small groan escaped from Zhu Wenxiang's mouth. It seemed he had finally reached his limit due to Im Gyul's continuous internal energy pressure. As an apprentice going through the Embroidered Uniform Guard selection process, he couldn't rebel against the examiner, so he had no choice but to endure it one-sidedly. You've reached your limit now. The corners of Im Gyul's mouth curled up eerily. Although it was admirable that the brat had endured his internal energy despite his young age, it was now over. Im Gyul tried to raise his cultivation level to finish it off decisively. Crack crack. As he raised his cultivation level further, the cracks on the floor spread even farther. Zhu Wenxiang's complexion worsened, indicating he had reached his limit. It was at that very moment. Someone grabbed his right wrist. Im Gyul, who had raised his cultivation level to nearly the 7th stage, frowned fiercely. Among the trainees, there was no one at a level capable of stopping him. Naturally, he thought it was Thousand Men Commander Mak Myongho who had intervened. So, I told you not to interfere. It was none other than trainee Bei Jisuk, or rather Mok Jiongun, wearing his face skin as a human skin mask. Seeing this, one of Im Gyul's eyebrows raised. Not even Thousand Men Commander Mak Myongho, But an apprentice trainee who hadn't even ranked in the top positions in the first test was now grabbing his wrist? At this, Im Gyewol was flabbergasted and tried to shake him off. Hover. Grip. What? Im Gyewol's eyes trembled. That was because he couldn't shake off the guy's hand. He had even raised his cultivation level to the 8th stage, yet it remained immovable. To the perplexed Im Gyewol, Mok Jae-eun smiled and said in a polite voice, "Thousand Men Commander. It seems you have sufficiently tested the trainee, so how about stopping here? You. Who the hell was this guy?" His cultivation level was much stronger than Ju Wunhyang, who had placed second in the internal energy test. Thousand Men Commander Im Gyewol's eyes quickly scanned the surroundings. All the apprentice trainees were looking at him, and he thought that if he continued this power struggle here he might end up embarrassing himself. Chapter 267. The Fourth Office, 3. Murmur. The trainees who were watching from the sides stirred. When Thousand Men Commander Im Gyewol was pressuring Ju Wunhyang with his internal energy, the atmosphere was heavy and chilling beyond words. However, the situation changed when one of the trainees intervened midway. Even Thousand Men Commander Mak Myung-ho, who could be considered the second in command of the Fourth Office, was afraid of Im Gyewol, the head, and couldn't touch him, so no one expected that an apprentice trainee undergoing the embroidered uniform guard selection would step up in this situation. What's with that guy? Is he in his right mind to grab the Thousand Men Commander's arm? Is he crazy and wants to fail the selection test? Those who thought this way were the trainees who ranked lower in the first selection. What's this? Did he just endure Thousand Men Commander Im Gyewol's cultivation level? I don't think this guy's internal energy was that deep. Yeom Jae-young, a disciple of the Hwashan sect, and the trainees who ranked higher couldn't hide their surprise at the sight of trainee Bae Ji-suk, who was only in the middle rank, enduring Thousand Men Commander Im Gyewol's cultivation level. Of course, if it were the real Bae Ji-suk he wouldn't have been able to do that. Inside that face skin was a completely different person. It was none other than Mok Jae-eun. Thanks to that, Ju Wunhyang, who had been freed from Thousand Men Commander Im Gyewol's internal energy pressure, frowned and raised his head to look at Mok Jae-eun, who had trainee Bae Ji-suk's face. He didn't have a chance to meet or talk to Bae Ji-suk because their Imperial Guard trainee ranks were different. Even during the training right before the apprenticeship it was the same. However, it's strange. Ju Wunhyang was gripped by a strange feeling. Somehow it felt familiar. Even though the face and voice were different, this familiarity. Could it be? Ju Wunhyang looked at Mok Jae-eun's face with suspicious eyes. It was at that very moment. Squeeze. The grip of Mok Jae-eun's hand holding Thousand Men Commander Im Gyewol's wrist tightened even more. This bastard. Im Gyewol's expression stiffened at the strengthened grip. It was no exaggeration to say that this guy's cultivation level was surpassing his own 8th stage cultivation level. Tremble. His wrist was trembling. If they were alone he might have raised his cultivation level to settle it. However, there were too many eyes watching right now. If he showed a moment of being overwhelmed in cultivation level, his authority as the examiner of the apprentice trainees would crumble. Damn it. But it was also a dilemma to figure out what to say and stop here. He was the one who started it. It was at that moment. Thud. Mok Jae-eun, who had been gripping his wrist, suddenly let go and clasped his hands together, lowering his head and politely said, "As expected, I can't withstand the Thousand Men Commander's cultivation level. I apologize for intervening midway while you were testing another trainee. I intervened out of concern that the trainee being tested might get hurt, so please understand with a generous heart." Flinch. At Mok Jae-eun's actions, Thousand Men Commander Im Gyewol's eyes sharpened. This damn bastard. He was truly a cunning fellow. He could have embarrassed him, but not only did he back off at an appropriate point midway, but he also deliberately chose a path to save face for him. Clench. Im Gyewol clenched his fists tightly and barely suppressed his anger. If he showed an emotional reaction here, it would not only ruin his reputation but also remove any justification. Alternating his sharp gaze between Mok Jae-eun and Ju Wunhyang, who were standing side by side, Im Gyewol smiled nonchalantly and said, "Indeed, I heard the trainees participating in this embroidered uniform guard selection have outstanding skills, and it's true to the word. Not only did you endure my sudden internal energy test well, but seeing how you flexibly responded for the sake of your competitor and comrade, I'm pleased." "Not at all. I apologize." Ju Wunhyang and Mok Jiongun replied simultaneously. Then, Im Gyul patted the shoulders of the two with a generous voice and said, I will specially give bonus points to both of you. Murmur murmur. Bonus points. Was it really a test? At those words the trainees couldn't hide their envy. The atmosphere was so hostile that they were worried about what trouble might occur, but seeing Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul even giving bonus points, it seemed he had really tested them unexpectedly. On the other hand, Ju Wunhyang inwardly clicked his tongue at Im Gyul's handling ability. He didn't reach this position for nothing. If he had acted emotionally he could have lost face, but he was quite skilled in dealing with the situation. Of course he thought his insides must be boiling with rage. So Ju Wunhyang thought he should be careful for a while. As he expected, Im Gyul spoke in a magnanimous manner but was grinding his teeth inwardly. I'll remember this, you bastards. Then I hope you obtain good results during the next 5 days and join the embroidered uniform guard. Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul withdrew, inwardly vowing revenge. As he entered the main building of the fourth office, Ju Wunhyang suppressed his boiling internal energy. Even though he had deflected it as much as possible, Im Gyul's internal energy was a step above his, so he almost suffered internal injuries. It would have been troublesome if it had lasted longer. It was a fortunate situation. If he hadn't properly internalized the innate true energy Thousand Men Commander So Yaren had injected, it could have been a big problem. While calming his true energy like that, Ju Wunhyang looked at Mok Jiongun, who had trainee Bei Jisuk's face, and spoke. Are you by any chance? By any chance what? Ju Wunhyang, who was about to ask something, eventually gave up on it. And he simply expressed her gratitude. Thank you. Thanks to you stepping up, I avoided internal injuries. That's fortunate. At those words, Ju Wunhyang's eyes narrowed. Although his voice was deep, this way of speaking and tone were definitely. At that moment, Thousand Men Commander Mak Myung-ho approached Ju Wunhyang and Mok Jiongun and spoke in a low voice so that only the two could hear. I don't know the reason, but both of you have essentially been marked by the Thousand Men Commander. Thanks to that you'll have a tiring 5 days. I'll keep an eye on you, but both of you should avoid trouble as much as possible. Thank you for your consideration. At this, Mok Jiongun and Ju Wunhyang politely clasped their hands together, lowered their heads and replied. That night, Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul personally prepared 2 maps. These maps, labeled as the Prison Battlefield Map, depicted the paths of the underground prison. The underground prison of the Imperial Palace had been continuously expanded for hundreds of years, so it was formed like a cave and was quite vast and dark, making it easy to get lost if one wasn't careful. Therefore, the embroidered uniform guards of the fourth office carried these prison battlefield maps to avoid losing their way. However, these prison battlefield maps were different from the existing ones. If one blindly trusted these maps and carelessly tried to find their way, they would end up in the wrong place. Specifically, in a trap with a mechanical device installed. They will now understand why, except for one person, no one has ever escaped from the Imperial Palace's underground prison unharmed for so long. There was no need to even use his own hands. If they died while wandering in the underground prison, no explanation would be necessary. Ju Wunhyang, Bei Jisuk. Those damn bastards almost made him lose face. Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul curled the corners of his mouth eerily. Thinking about them wandering in the underground prison and meeting their end, he couldn't contain his excitement. Im Gyul then rolled up the 2 maps, tied them with red threads and placed them among the 9 maps. He used red threads only for the ones he would give to them. Feeling satisfied, he left the office and headed to his personal quarters. When one became a commander of 1,000 or above, they were given personal quarters, and when they reached the level of 1,000 Men Commander, they could have a separate nice room like this. Thud. Im Gyul hung his outer robe on the coat hanger and lay down on the bed in a good mood. It was at that very moment. Stab. Thud. Ugh. His back arched upward like a bow. Something had simultaneously pierced 2 spots on his spine, and the pain was indescribable. However, for some unknown reason he couldn't make a sound. What the hell is this? As he was bewildered, he heard a rattling sound from under the bed. Then someone crawled out from under the bed. Seeing the face of that unidentified someone, Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul couldn't help but be shocked. Bei Jisuk. It was none other than trainee Bei Jisuk, or rather Mok Jiongun, wearing his face. Mokjun brought his lips close to his ear and whispered softly. I was bored waiting for you, Thousand-Men Commander. Flinch. Who the hell is this bastard? How did he get in here? Thousand-Men Commander Imgyuul couldn't help but be perplexed. The area around the main building of the fourth office was guarded by Imperial guards, and the dormitory building had the lesser banners, the lowest rank in the embroidered uniform guard, taking turns on duty. Yet he infiltrated while avoiding them? Putting aside the infiltration, how did he evade my senses? Did a mere trainee really surpass my martial arts? Seeing his reaction, Mok Jaeong-un chuckled. What a nice expression. With those words, Mok Jaeong-un lightly touched his waist, which was arched like a bow. Press. Uff. Imgyuul was in so much pain that his face turned bright red from his originally pale complexion. Even the veins on his forehead bulged. This son of a b****. He sincerely wanted to tear Mok Jaeong-un apart and kill him. However, when Mok Jaeong-un pressed the area around his spinal vertebrae once more, arg. A pain like being struck by lightning spread throughout his body through his spine. It was the first time he had experienced such pain in his life. It was difficult to even breathe properly. Ha. Beads of cold sweat formed on Imgyuul's face. Seeing him like this, Mok Jaeong-un curled the corners of his mouth eerily and whispered in his ear. I once read a book on acupuncture, and there was a dangerous acupuncture technique that shouldn't be done recklessly. Do you know what it is? How would I know that? Unable to speak, Imgyuul glared at Mok Jaeong-un as if he wanted to kill him. Then Mok Jaeong-un smiled brightly and said, I forgot, it's difficult for you to answer. It's nothing much, just that there's a technique called spinal acupuncture, and unless you're a truly skilled physician, you shouldn't carelessly insert needles near the spine. If you're not careful, the needles can penetrate into the spine and be dangerous or something like that. What? At Mok Jaeong-un's words, Imgyuul's eyes trembled. But this was just the beginning. But what's even more interesting is that it was written that as the pain intensifies like that, you become paralyzed and unable to walk ever again. Paralyzed? At those words, Imgyuul felt like he was going crazy. The pain in his waist was too severe to just let it go. Imgyuul's complexion, filled with fear, gradually turned pale. Mok Jaeong-un whispered in his ear. I'm quite cautious, so when someone harbors ill feelings towards me, I don't just let it slide. Press. Yuck. As the needles penetrated even deeper, Imgyuul writhed in pain, unable to come to his senses. Mok Jaeong-un, who was watching him suffer with a gleeful expression, brought something to his eyes when he had barely gotten used to the pain. Schwip. It was none other than a sharp needle. Bringing such a needle right in front of his eyes, Imgyuul couldn't help but be perplexed. What was he trying to do with this now? As he was puzzled, Mok Jaeong-un resolved his question. This needle is something a certain person had, and it's coated with poison. You're curious about what kind of poison, right? Poison. Imgyuul's pupils trembled at the mention of poison on the needle. Just having the sharp point flickering in front of his eyes was agonizing, but hearing that it was also coated with poison made him feel like he was going crazy. To the frightened Imgyuul, Mok Jaeong-un smiled and nonchalantly said, This is nothing much either, but if the needle is inserted into the eyeball, the poison quickly spreads to the brain, causing a state of mental disability, should I say? This was nothing much. Chapter 268. The Fourth Office 4. Impeach. Thousand-Men Commander Imgyuul groaned and tried to twist his body. The moment that poisonous needle flickering in front of his eyes pierced his eyeball, he could even become mentally disabled, so he wanted to avoid it at all costs. At that moment, Mok Jaeong-un chuckled and slightly pulled out one of the needles embedded in his spine. As the needle was pulled out, Imgyuul's waist, which had been arched like a bow, straightened. Gasp. Why, you bastard. Bastard? You better be careful with your attitude. Grind. At Mok Jaeong-un's low warning, Thousand-Men Commander Imgyuul gritted his teeth. He wanted to subdue the guy and make him pull out the needles right away, but if he made a mistake and ended up paralyzed, his life in the Imperial Palace would be over. What the hell are you doing this for? Aren't you afraid of the consequences? Consequences? Did you just say consequences? No, that's not what I meant. I'm curious about how you'll repay the consequences if you become mentally disabled. Imgyuul couldn't say anything to Mok Jaeong-un's mocking words. As the guy said, if he became unable to even recognize anything, he couldn't do anything about consequences or whatnot. Im Gyul glared at Mok Jae-eun as if he was resentful and opened his mouth. What the hell do you want? I'm glad you're someone who can be reasoned with. What did he mean by being reasoned with after sticking needles in his spine and holding a poisonous needle to his eye? His insides were boiling, but Im Gyul tried hard to suppress it. If he could escape this crisis, there would always be an opportunity for revenge. Before I tell you what I want, let's hear what Thousand Men Commander Im was trying to do first. At that question, Im Gyul flinched for a moment. That was because before coming here he had plotted with the fake prison battlefield maps to trap Mok Jae-eun, who had trainee Bae Ji-suk's face and trainee Ju Won-hyang. Naturally, he couldn't help but be perplexed when asked about it. So he played dumb. What are you talking about? You surely know what I'm talking about. What do you mean? I'm the examiner testing you apprentice trainees. Are you saying that I, as the examiner, was trying to do something to you guys? If you think it's because of what happened earlier, I've already forgotten about it. So. Squeeze. Ugh. Mok Jae-eun grabbed his cheeks with his hand. And he slowly applied force to his hand. Uff. Due to the force applied to his cheeks, his cheekbones and teeth hurt as if they would break. To the suffering Im Gyul, Mok Jae-eun whispered in his ear. For someone who has forgotten, your eyes have been bad the whole time, so it's been bothering me. Someone with such eyes wouldn't just let it go without doing anything. I didn't. I can't trust you. It seems too much to make you paralyzed, so if I end it by making you mentally disabled, I won't have to worry about the Thousand Men Commander either. Shwip. Mok Jae-eun brought the poisonous needle to his eye. Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul, who thought it was a threat to make him speak, vowed to endure it no matter what. However, that didn't last long. It was because of Mok Jae-eun's expression as he smiled at him. He was smiling as if he was enjoying it, and that smile was filled with nothing but malice. He'll do it. This bastard will definitely do it. Normally one would think it was a simple threat. Because anyone who wanted to become an embroidered uniform guard would know that they shouldn't make enemies with the examiner testing them. But this bastard's expression and eyes showed that he didn't care about that at all. So Im Gyul hurriedly spoke. Give me bonus points to fail selection. You tried to give bonus points to fail us in the embroidered uniform guard selection? Yes. Im Gyul lied as plausibly as possible. If he told the truth according to his real plan, not only would this bastard not leave him alone, but his revenge for what he had done now would also fly away. Still, he thought he had spoken plausibly, so he might be deceived, but he couldn't help but feel nervous. At that moment, Mok Jae-eun nodded and said, Well, you used your brain to some extent. Such a way of revenge. Shwip. Mok Jae-eun let go of the hand he was gripping. Phew. Then Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul inwardly felt relieved. He was worried that this bastard might not believe him and probe further, but fortunately he seemed to have been deceived. But at that very moment, flick. Mok Jae-eun was seen curling his middle finger towards his forehead and fixing it with his thumb. Seeing this, Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul furrowed his brows. A flick. Smack. The flicked middle finger struck his forehead with great force. At the tremendous impact that seemed to pierce through his forehead and penetrate his brain, Im Gyul's eyes widened as if they would tear, and a scream was about to burst out of his mouth. Of course, Mok Jae-eun covered his mouth so he couldn't scream. Uff. To the suffering Im Gyul, Mok Jae-eun said with a smile. Did you think I would believe that? If you had planned to take revenge in such a childish way, you would have given me penalty points instead of bonus points earlier. Uff. I can't believe it. Tell me what you originally had in mind step by step. I'll only let it slide once. With those words, Mok Jae-eun held up the poisonous needle and waved it. Im Gyul, who had lost his senses from a single flick, drooled and blankly stared at it. The force behind the flick was so strong that he even had the illusion that his forehead bone was cracked, no shattered. Your answer is late. An underground prison. Give wrong prison battlefield map. To get lost. Wrong prison battlefield map? Yes. Come to think of it, he had heard that the underground prison was so vast that it was like a maze. Without the prison battlefield map, one could even lose their life by wandering and falling into the prison's mechanical trap. At this, the corners of Mok Jae-eun's mouth slightly rose. Now it sounds more plausible. Where is that wrong prison battlefield map? Fourth office. If it's not there, I might as well stab this needle into your eyeball without wasting time. It's bothersome to talk more. It's not a lie. There are 2 maps marked with red thread, different from the other prison battlefield maps. Those are the ones. At his words, Mok Jae-eun was convinced that it was true this time. Words alone certainly couldn't be trusted. But if there was something prepared like this, it was definite. Moreover, not 1 but 2 maps. The targets were also clear. Me and Ju Won-hyang. So Mok Jae-eun placed his hand on Gyul's shoulder and said, "If you had told me this from the beginning, we wouldn't have had to go through this trouble. I absolutely won't do anything reckless. So please end it here. I won't give you penalty points or do anything like that either." Of course you shouldn't. But I haven't even gotten to the main point yet. Main point? Yes. Actually, I have no interest in the embroidered uniform guard selection or whatnot. What? What the hell did this mean? The Imperial Guard training was the embroidered uniform guard selection process. If he participated in it, what did he mean by having no interest? To the puzzled Gyul, Mok Jae-eun nonchalantly said, "Rather than that, I'd like to quietly take out the person I want from the underground prison. It would be much easier if Thousand-Men Commander Gyul, the head of the 4th office who manages it, helped me." At Mok Jae-eun's completely unexpected words, Thousand-Men Commander Gyul's eyes widened. Wasn't this saying to help a convicted criminal imprisoned in the underground prison escape? And he was asking him, the one who managed the prison, to help with that? So Gyul spoke in a flabbergasted tone. "Are you crazy? Even though I'm suffering like this because I made an enemy out of you, I'm the head of the 4th office. Do you think I would help a prisoner escape from the underground prison?" Gyul showed his pride and spirit as an embroidered uniform guard for the first time. He even showed a strong determination, as if this was something he absolutely couldn't help with. To him, Mok Jae-eun said with a smile, "I told you there wouldn't be a second warning. This is something I can't do. Even if you threaten me." "Oh ho. You want to show me your will? Then shall we change that method of threat a little?" "What? You've been embezzling funds all this time whenever you moved departments to help the Grand Preceptor Hang Yoon's faction, right?" At those words, the eyes of Gyul, who had shown his will, trembled. He had been collecting funds by manipulating the ledgers as much as possible to avoid detection. No one had noticed until now, so how did this bastard know? What are you talking about?" Gyul strongly denied it. Then Mok Jae-eun took out a book from his bosom. Seeing this, Gyul's expression stiffened. It was none other than the secret ledger he had hidden in his office. Why is that? In that bastard's hand? Of course this is a part of the secret ledgers hidden in a secret place in the 4th office. I took it because I thought it would be useful. It was something Mok Jae-eun's subordinate, Mong Muyak, had secretly entered the 4th office's office and took. They thought the embezzlement ledger could be used to pressure him as the head of the 4th office. And now it was being used usefully like this. If the higher-ups of Thousand-Men Commander Gyul find out about this, it doesn't seem like it would be good for you. If you're unlucky, you might end up imprisoned in the Imperial Palace's prison. It would be interesting. The prison manager being imprisoned in the prison he managed. These words from Mok Jae-eun eventually became the deciding factor. Thousand-Men Commander Gyul finally surrendered and lowered his head deeply. After agreeing to everything Mok Jae-eun wanted, he wrote a document and stamped it with the 4th office's official seal and his own seal. Of course, Mok Jae-eun didn't stop there and also made him addicted to poison, just like he had done to Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-seo. At this level of thoroughness, Thousand-Men Commander Gyul clicked his tongue. As Mok Jae-eun was about to leave his quarters, he asked out of curiosity, "But why are you targeting trainee Ju Won-hyang?" He was already curious about this. He knew that Ju Won-hyang had quite a few enemies, but he suddenly wondered why he was targeting her. At Mok Jae-eun's question, Gyul didn't want to answer, but he had already been caught by his weakness, so he reluctantly replied, "Because of Thousand-Men Commander So Yerin." Mok Jae-eun tilted his head and asked again, "Thousand-Men Commander So Yerin?" "Yes. Did you have a problem with her?" "I have no problem with her. I was just annoyed that Thousand-Men Commander So Yerin, who is strict in public and private matters, was paying attention to that bastard Ju Won-hyang." "Ha! Mok Jae-un burst into laughter at the unexpected answer, thinking there might be another reason. The reason he had suddenly acted emotionally turned out to be stemming from emotions. Jealousy. Humans seem inefficient because of their emotions. Mok Jae-un shook his head and left his quarters. Not long after Mok Jae-un left, Thousand Men Commander Im Gyu-wol, who judged that he had completely disappeared, couldn't contain his anger and vented his frustration by breaking everything in his quarters. Bang bang. This was the first time in his life that he had experienced such humiliation. Not only was he threatened and had his weakness caught, but he was even addicted to poison. If he didn't vent this anger somewhere, he felt like he wouldn't be able to endure it. Bang. He even smashed his own bed. Only after breaking almost everything inside did he seem to calm down a bit. Im Gyu-wol, who sat on the floor, gritted his teeth and muttered in a small voice. Grind. Don't think this is over. I will definitely pay you back somehow. He made a vow for the future. Even if it took 10 years, it wasn't too late for a man's revenge. To the bastard who had given him such humiliation, he would definitely repay it equally, no, twice, 3 times. What will you repay? At that moment, Im Gyu-wol's expression stiffened at the voice coming from behind. There was no presence felt behind him at all. Had he heard an illusion? As he turned his head with a tense expression, Mok Jae-un was standing at the door of his quarters, holding 2 scrolls of the fake prison battlefield maps. Chapter 269, Underground Prison 1. The next morning on a chilly day, Thousand Men Commander Mak Myung-bo visited the office of Thousand Men Commander Im Gyu-wol, the head of the 4th office. Entering the office, Mak Myung-bo's eyes flickered with surprise. Im Gyu-wol had a swollen face as if injured, and was shirtless while the embroidered uniform guard's dedicated physician was applying needles and moxibustion to his right shoulder. Judging by his expression, the injury did not seem light. Mak Myung-bo asked in surprise, Thousand Men Commander, where did you get injured? At his question, Thousand Men Commander Im Gyu-wol replied in an irritated voice. Can't you tell by looking? Last night, thinking the guy had left, he had vowed for the future but was caught off guard. Who would have thought the guy would come back? Of course, he thought he would return to the trainee dormitory. Anyway, as a result, he had paid a severe price. Let's end it here. So you're lucky. If you were even slightly useless, it would have been better to just dispose of you. Lucky? Damn bastard. Not only did he make him a wreck like this, but his right shoulder was completely broken. According to the physician, it would take over a month of recuperation for the broken bone to fully heal. But the worst part was that he said he wouldn't be able to move his shoulder freely like before. It was practically devastating news for him, as his right hand was his dominant hand. Bae Ji-suk. He was so angry that he wanted to tear the guy apart and kill him, but not only was his weakness caught, but he was also addicted to poison, so he had no choice but to cater to the guy's whims. This made him even more miserable. Damn bastard. I will definitely repay this grudge someday. Even though he had suffered like that yesterday, he still hadn't given up. He was said to lie on sticks and taste gall. Although he had to grovel for now, if he endured this misery, he believed an opportunity would surely come someday. But what's the matter? At Im Gyu-wol's question, Mak Myung-bo clasped his hands together and said with a bow. I've come to borrow the prison battlefield maps necessary for the apprentice trainee's prison infiltration today. Prison battlefield maps? The prison battlefield maps were very important items. Since they contained the locations of mechanical traps and all the internal geography of the prison, the number of maps was limited, and because they couldn't be carelessly leaked, they were kept by Im Gyu-wol, the head of the 4th office, who was in charge of the prisons. If it's that, in that case. Im Gyu-wol, who was about to speak, stopped as if realizing something. TSK. There were still 2 prison battlefield maps tied with red thread on top of the maps. If he had his way, he wanted to hand over those prison battlefield maps as they were. But since that Bae Ji-suk bastard had already confirmed those incorrect prison battlefield maps, he couldn't deceive him. So he had to replace them with the correct prison battlefield maps. Go prepare the apprentice trainees and I'll personally give them to you. But your body is not well. Didn't I say I would personally bring them to you? Understood. Although puzzled, how could he disobey his superior's order? Thousand Men Commander Mak Myung-bo withdrew. After he left, Im Gyu-wol was about to ask the embroidered uniform guard physician to finish the treatment. At that moment, someone knocked on the office door. Thousand Men Commander. It was the voice of Thousand Men Commander Mak Myongbo. Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul shouted irritably. Didn't I clearly say I would personally bring them to you? At that moment the office door opened. As the door opened, Im Gyul, startled by the sight of a middle-aged man in a silver ceremonial robe entering, hastily rose from his seat while wrapping his bandages and paid his respects. I greet the Defender-in-Chief. Fourth rank Embroidered Uniform Guard Defender-in-Chief. Although the Embroidered Uniform Guard was attached to the title, the Defender-in-Chief was not a position incorporated into the Embroidered Uniform Guard. In a way, it could be considered a special rank. The Defender-in-Chief was the escort warrior for the princes who received the throne, and since they could mobilize the Embroidered Uniform Guard's chief banners in special situations or emergencies, the affiliation name Embroidered Uniform Guard was attached to the front. Why is the Defender-in-Chief here? The Defender-in-Chief was equivalent in rank to the Embroidered Uniform Guard's Pacification Commissioner, who could be considered the Chief Executive Officer. In conclusion, he was a higher-ranking official and a person of power. It's been a while, Thousand Men Commander Im. I'm extremely grateful that you remember me. He was sincerely grateful that he remembered him from when he was just a lesser banner. The Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam in front of him was someone who was close to the position he desired the most. Although he had been pushed out of the position of Crown Prince now, wasn't he closely serving as an escort to this prince who was once the most likely candidate for the throne succession? Moreover, his martial arts were said to be no inferior to those of the Northern Pacification Commissioner or the chief eunuchs of the Eastern and Western depots. Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam said to him, "Could we have a private conversation for a moment?" "Of course." At his words, Thousand Men Commander Im Gyul hurriedly sent out the Imperial Palace physician. And he personally locked the office door. However, the eyes of Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam, who was looking at his back as he walked shirtless, sharpened fiercely. Unaware of this, Im Gyul prepared seats. After examining the surroundings with his senses, Mook Siam, who sat at the table, lightly waved his hand. Im Gyul couldn't hide his bewilderment. The reason was that Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam had used true energy to block the sound inside and outside the room. It seemed he wanted to have a confidential conversation. "I'll get straight to the point without beating around the bush." "Yes. About what?" "You were cooperating with 100 Men Commander Jiam Chong under the command of the Associate Military Commissioner, right?" "What?" At that question, Im Gyul's expression stiffened. This was a matter that required attention and confidentiality. Im Gyul belonged to the faction of the Grand Preceptor Hang Yun, who held the positions of Grand Preceptor and Admiral of the Central Military Commission, so he also received orders from Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikesio. Originally, even if they were both from the Embroidered Uniform Guard, only the fourth office could be deployed for prison duties. However, with the order from Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikesio, 100 Men Commander Jiam Chong was temporarily incorporated into the fourth office under the pretext of cooperating for the interrogation of the Fire Faith Order believers. This was a confidential matter that was carried out only when trusted individuals belonging to the faction were on duty, so how did this person know about it? So Im Gyul tried his best not to show any signs and opened his mouth. "I don't know what you're talking about. No need to deceive me. I'm also a person of His Excellency Hang Yun." At those words, Im Gyul furrowed his brows. A person of His Excellency Hang Yun? He had heard that there were quite a few people in the faction that he didn't know, but Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam was even more known as a person of this prince, Prince Zhang. Therefore there was no way he could trust him. At that moment, Im Gyul took something out of his bosom and showed it. It was none other than, the military tally of the Central Military Commission with Grand Preceptor as the Admiral. Seeing the military tally that could mobilize the Central Military Commission, not anything else, Im Gyul could sense that his words were true. This was evidence that couldn't be entrusted unless there was considerable trust. "I borrowed this military tally from His Excellency in case you couldn't believe me." Thud. At this, Im Gyul knelt on one knee and clasped his hands together, paying his respects to him. "I was unaware." "Get up. It's natural for you not to know. There are only a few people who know this fact, including His Excellency." At his words, Im Gyul inwardly felt excited. Did the fact that Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam was saying this mean that His Excellency Hang Yun had decided to make great use of him? Otherwise, There was no way someone in such a high position would reveal his true faction. Feeling excited, Im Gyuwol stood up, and Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam lowered his voice and abruptly said something unexpected. By the way, did 100-Men Commander Jiam Chong finish the interrogation? Are you talking about the interrogation? Yes. Not yet. At his answer, Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam stroked his beard and let out a groan. Can't be helped. But how do you know about that? No. You don't need to know that much. Pardon. Rather, a slight problem has arisen and 100-Men Commander Jiam Chong can no longer continue the interrogation. What do you mean by that? Until just a few days ago, 100-Men Commander Jiam Chong was determined to continue the interrogation in order to find that so-called treasure orb. He was doing so because there was an order from the Associate Military Commissioner not to ask why, but suddenly saying he couldn't continue the interrogation made him curious. So, it's just as I said. Rather, there's something I need you to do. Since it's a direct order from His Excellency, you can do it, right? What kind of order? It's something that only you as the head of the Fourth Office can do. If you help me accomplish this safely, the Grand Preceptor will acknowledge your merit. The Grand Preceptor, you say? At these words, Im Gyuwol swallowed dry saliva and spoke with an enthusiastic voice, clasping his hands together. Please tell me anything. I will definitely carry out His Excellency's order. I'm glad to hear that. Then the late-stage disciples sent by the Heaven and Earth Society will soon try to break out the Fire Faith Order believer imprisoned in the Eternal Hell Prison. I'd like you to assist them. As soon as he finished speaking, Im Gyuwol couldn't hide his perplexity. What the hell was going on? Why did His Excellency the Grand Preceptor give such an order, just like that Bae Ji-suk bastard last night? Unlike regular prisons where prisoners could be taken out through various methods, the underground prison was a place where it was absolutely impossible to take out prisoners. That's why, unlike before, he knew that people were sent in to interrogate the Fire Faith Order believers. But why were they suddenly trying to kidnap them? He didn't know, but it was extremely difficult. What should I do about this? He didn't know exactly who they were trying to kidnap, but he was also in a position where he had to forcibly help that Bae Ji-suk bastard. That bastard also said he would break someone out of the Eternal Hell Prison. Wait, something is strange. Something coincidentally overlapped in terms of timing. It was strange that the higher-ups were suddenly trying to forcibly take out the Fire Faith Order believer they had given up on. And it was too much of a coincidence that the Bae Ji-suk bastard was also trying to kidnap someone from the Eternal Hell Prison. Could it be that the person that Bae Ji-suk bastard is trying to kidnap is also a Fire Faith Order believer? So in order to prevent that, were they trying to take out the Fire Faith Order believer in advance? If this was the case, it made sense for the higher-ups to suddenly give such an order. But this was just his guess. And that wasn't the problem. Damn it. Right now, not only was his weakness caught, but he was also addicted to poison. So he had no choice but to forcibly follow Bae Ji-suk. But if this guess turned out to be correct, he wouldn't be able to carry out the order from the higher-ups and would end up betraying them. Im Gyuwol's eyes trembled severely, confused by the situation where he was caught between a rock and a hard place. At that moment, Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam raised one eyebrow. Thud. Swip. He suddenly lifted Im Gyuwol's chin and stared intently into his eyes. Why, Your Excellency? Why was he suddenly doing this? As he was puzzled, Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam said something unexpected. Oh, look at this. Pardon? What? You've also been addicted to poison. At those words, Im Gyuwol's eyes widened. How did Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam know about this? But then he asked, am I right, or not? Just answer that. At his question, Im Gyuwol was at a loss for what to do. Because his weaknesses, including the embezzlement ledger, had been caught by Bae Ji-suk, it was extremely cautious to even say something. Seeing his reaction, Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam shook his head and said, it seems you've been caught by other weaknesses besides poison. How does he know that? Im Gyuwol couldn't hide his surprise at Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam's insight. Even though he couldn't answer anything, it was amazing how he deduced his situation to this extent. But on the other hand, he became afraid. His weaknesses caught by that bastard, that is, the embezzlement ledger, were connected to the higher-ups Grand Preceptor Hangyun and could cause damage, so he was scared of being cast out if they found out. Not knowing what to do, Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam placed his hand on his shoulder and spoke in a chilling voice. I don't know what weaknesses have made you tight-lipped, but let me make it clear. Confessing the truth right now is the only chance for you to live. Squeeze. With those words, the hand of Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam on his shoulder tightened its grip. The 12 trainees of the Snake Guard were waiting. They had finished preparing to infiltrate the prison, but they were still waiting because they hadn't received the prison battlefield maps yet. At that moment, a deputy 1,000-man commander of the embroidered uniform guard was seen coming from the other side of the pavilion. In the case the deputy 1,000-man commander was carrying, there were 12 scrolls. Looks like he's here. It was 1,000-man commander Mak Myongbo, who had been waiting for a long time like the trainees and was feeling frustrated. What the hell was he talking about with Defender-in-Chief Mook Siam that it took so long? He should have just given them then. In any case, he didn't come in person and sent the deputy 1,000-man commander instead. Anyway, because of that, the infiltration was delayed and the prisoners' meal distribution was also delayed. 1,000-man commander Mak Myongbo shouted irritably. Why are you so late? My apologies. But 1,000-man commander, don't you know? At the embroidered uniform guard deputy 1,000-man commander's words, 1,000-man commander Mak Myongbo shook his head. Then he extended his hand. Give them to me. I need to distribute them to the trainees and inform them of their infiltration locations. I guess it's because the meal distribution was delayed. Then I'll distribute them directly to the trainees right away. All right. 1,000-man commander Mak Myongbo, whose mind had become impatient, told him to do so. In that way, the 12 apprentice trainees received the prison battlefield maps and were assigned their respective infiltration locations. Most of the trainees were evenly deployed from the first to the third floor of the prison. At this moment, the eyes of Mok Jae-young, who had the face of trainee Bae Ji-suk, narrowed. The place he was assigned to was none other than the third floor of the prison.